Welcome back everyone and good morning. In today's episode we're going to be talking about the RF100-500, but we're not going to be focusing on that specific lens or Canon at all. We're actually going to be talking more about that focal range for landscape photography. But first, let's get to where we're going, and hopefully by the time we get there, there's some more light. Because right now I am pushing this camera to its absolute limits to even film me right now. It is pretty dark. Let's get moving.
Staring in the silent cold. Are you frozen? Are you broken? The valley showing down below. Are you floating? Are you hoping? I've been living on the edge of somewhere I don't know, and it feels like it just might crumble.
Okay, so my plan was to rush over to the lake and take more photos that are specifically for the 100-500, but I got kind of distracted by this ethereal forest of fog, moss, and oak trees. Let's keep moving, but absolutely gorgeous.
Staring at an empty place with a blank face in a blank space.
Man, it has been an absolutely hectic morning. I thought it was going to be pretty leisurely. Came in as the sun was coming up in that set of oak trees like we stopped and I talked about. Got distracted by that, and then by the time I got here, I just wanted to shoot in every direction with the 100-500 here, which is what this video is about. I just haven't got around to talking about it yet because it's just too much stuff to shoot. That's kind of one of the, I guess it's both a pro and a con, is that when you have this much focal length, you can shoot all kinds of stuff in every direction. So it's very hard to choose what you end up wanting to shoot. But that's kind of one of the beauties of the focal range, is that all of this stuff that's off in the distance way over here, let me just take a quick shot of it at 100 mil. All of this stuff off in the distance over here is not accessible at 200 mil. Maybe I can get some shots, maybe I can't. When I zoom all the way into 500, it really starts opening up all these shots way off in the distance, like you see on the screen now, which is absolutely wild. So it means that that stuff could be compositions. There's stuff over here that can be compositions. There's animals. And I think that's that's why it's been so hard to get rid of this lens, is that as my landscape photography has changed, I've paid way more attention to those things that are off in the distance, or those little details, rather than the bigger scenes.
So you dream chase. I've been living on the edge of somewhere I don't know, and it feels like it just might crumble. I've been looking at the outside.
But the thing is, I bought this lens before going to Alaska. I even made a whole video on it. Also, we're gonna talk about this lens in this episode, don't worry. And I'm gonna figure out what the heck's going on with my hair. About how my plan was to buy it, to have it for wildlife photography, because I didn't really have that reach that I needed for wildlife photography. I was gonna take it with me to Alaska, shoot that kind of stuff, kind of experiment with it for landscapes, and then sell it at kind of a couple $100 loss, but more of like a long period of renting. That was over the summer. And it's very clear I still have it, which is funny because I always told myself there's no way I'm keeping it. I can't justify it. I've always been a minimalist shooter. 2 lenses, 16-35, 70-200, that's all I need. That's what my entire portfolio has been shot on. I don't need the extra 200-500 unless I'm shooting wildlife. And before Colorado, I kind of felt that way. But then when I started using this lens out on the kayak when I was shooting all the cypress trees, earlier this year, or late last year rather, this was the only lens I really shot on. And I couldn't imagine not having it in that situation. Situation like this. Now I can't imagine not having it. And it's one of those things where I've been thinking a lot about, you know, when you add that focal range, it allows you to see more stuff. So if I walked up to this scene here with only a 70-200 as my longest focal range, I would probably be looking for completely different compositions. Maybe I'd be shooting wider shots. Maybe I'd be shooting patterns of trees all together. Maybe I would be shooting a lot less detailed stuff. But now that I have this, those are the things I'm shooting. At the end of the day, I think I could come here with whatever lens I had and probably take stuff, right? So for all of the time that I'm sitting here spending shooting at 500 mil, 400 mil, 300 mil, I could be using that time to find bigger scenes or shoot a little bit wider. No matter what, if you show up to a beautiful spot like this, you're gonna find shots, regardless of what lens you have. And it never felt like I was missing anything when I didn't have this lens. But it's this weird psychology thing that I didn't know I wanted it so much until I got it. Whereas it was almost like if I'd never got it, I would have been fine without it, if that makes any sense. Anyways, more to this story. I'm gonna keep taking some photos and enjoy some of this nice moody morning here in Florida.
Fire and snow, searching for my own soul, hanging on the gallows, hanging on the gallows, hanging on the gallows, hanging on the gallows. You're my harbor, it's getting darker without you. You're my harbor, it's getting darker without you. You're my harbor, it's getting darker without you.
But as I was saying, what's really interesting about having the lens or not having the lens is that when you walk up somewhere, if I walked up to this area with only one lens, I would find shots, I would find something. And I think that's what's important about photography, is that you can make any lens work. The more options you have sometimes can be overwhelming. And it sometimes can be, it'll just make it where you can't find any of the shots that you want. That's why there's a lot of recommendations, or a lot of the times people switch to walking around with just one lens, a prime lens even, as a challenge to themselves, as a challenge as a photographer, to work with just one focal length and make it work. And that creative challenge can be really invigorating for a lot of photographers. And sometimes having too many options doesn't change anything about your photography. Hey, mid-edit, I'm interrupting because I wanted to point out the irony of the fact that, not that you've seen all the images from this video yet, but my favorite image from that morning was taken at 28 mil of those mossy trees in the fog. It has nothing to do with my telephoto lens. It was the quickest image I took all morning, and it just goes to show that you can show up anywhere with pretty much any lens and probably find images you like. Because that happens to be the one I like the most that whole morning when I was making a video about the 100-500. Okay, back to me. The reality is, before I got the lens, I didn't know I needed it. I didn't miss it. I was very satisfied with my two lenses and shooting with just those my entire time of shooting photography in the last 5 or 6 years. Now that I have it, I will say I'm a little spoiled, because it's scenes like this where I can walk up and find so many cool shots at a distance where I'm not having to be, I don't know, it just gives me a lot of options, especially when I'm shooting on the road, and especially since I've been shooting out of the car a lot more, meaning the weight of the lens and the size of the lens isn't as cumbersome as if I'm trying to pack it in my bag. So that's definitely a factor to play into, is that I'm not getting rid of my 70-200. If anything, I'm probably still shooting a decent amount at 100-200, which we'll talk about later in this video. I'm gonna go through and just talk about all my images that are above 200 millimeters since getting the lens, just to see which ones even stick out. Maybe I could have shot most of them at 200-250. I'm not entirely sure, because I haven't done that yet. Still gonna keep taking some shots this morning. It is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, the sun has been up for about 50 minutes now, but because of the way the conditions are, there's still a lot of opportunity here. So I'm gonna keep taking some shots with the 100-500 and keep enjoying this beautiful morning, aside from these mosquitoes, because it's 72 degrees here in Florida, January 31st. Now you know why I moved.
Feels like it just might crumble. I've been looking at the outside, fire and stone, searching for my young soul, hanging on the gallows, hanging on the gallows, hanging on the gallows.
All right, so I'm on the beautiful white sand beaches here in Florida. I'm just kidding. It's clearly not Florida based off the way I'm dressed. There's a bit of a time delay, time shift from the last part of what you just saw till now. I am currently in Norway and I took a break from filming and making videos. So to wrap up this video, we're gonna do it right here in Norway. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was going through my images from last year and sorting by shooting, only looking for the focal range above 200 mil in that super zoom range. So I did that. I went through my catalog and I enabled the metadata to only show me images above 200 mil. I also went through some of those images once I did that and looked at the ones that were only in like the 250 mil range. And I didn't really include those in my synopsis because I think even at 250 mil, you could get to that range even on a normal telephoto 200 mil lens. And I think really what I'm looking at is the 300-500 range, but I'll still talk about some of the other ones as well. And overall, I found images that I really love. Some of my favorite images from Alaska, like the one of Denali, I absolutely love. The two shots that I took in Colorado during the fall color change, the one of the mist over Ridgeway and the one of the moon rising above those peaks, would not have been possible without this lens. And finally, the trip on the kayak in Texas, it was the only lens I had, so it's a little bit biased in that sense because I didn't bring any other lenses on the kayak with me. I was only shooting 100-500. However, a lot of those images are on the further range of that 500 mil. And it wouldn't have been possible to take those images without this lens. But I wanted to add that caveat because I think if you're going to something like that and you're only gonna be able to take one lens on the kayak and you need it to be a certain focal length, you could just rent that lens. Just like if you were going to shoot the Milky Way and you don't have a lens to shoot the Milky Way, you could just rent it. So when it comes to those really niche areas, you could just rent a lens to get the focal range or the type of image you need. However, the images that I took in Colorado and the ones in Alaska, I just wouldn't have been able to capture without this lens. All right, so would I recommend this lens for landscape photography? And I think if I'm being true to myself and true to you, I don't think you need this lens for landscape photography. Now, if you shoot any wildlife and you get to double up and shoot wildlife and landscape photography with it, I think it's worth it. Also, you don't necessarily have to have the same lens that I have that costs almost $3,000. You can get a sub $1,000 lens that gets this focal range and might capture everything you could possibly want to capture in what you want to shoot. But at the end of the day, I think that this is probably the last range of distances you need for landscape photography. A lot of the times, 300-500 mil was actually too close. A lot of the times I just wanted to shoot 200 mil, maybe 220 or even less, and I would switch to my 70-200 a lot in those events. And I think that even though it ends up creating some of my favorite images from last year, it's just because I had it with me for other reasons. I think at the end of the day, this would be the first lens I got rid of if I was going on a backpacking trip where space was of an issue or weight, and it's the last lens that I would buy in my kit, which it was. At this point, I felt like I had everything I needed, and I wanted something for wildlife photography, and I wanted to see how it was for landscape photography. And I think after everything's said and done, even though I talked about how much I loved having it, and it giving me the options of being able to walk up somewhere and find a bunch of images in an area that I wouldn't normally find, I still think that it's probably the least ratioed lens that I have in terms of cost and weight per resulting image at that focal range. I think I still prefer my 70-200 over it, even though I still find myself currently with it on a lot when I'm driving around, just so I have more flexibility from far away distances when I'm driving. But like I said, at the end of the day, I don't think you need this lens unless you have specific needs for it or you've already got everything else. Anyways, that's my recommendation. That's my opinion on the 100-500, but more specifically the super zoom range of maybe 250 to 500. So I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can like the video. If you loved it, consider subscribing. Going to be a lot of Norway content coming out that I'm sure you're going to want to check out. And as always, there's got to be a rainbow out there somewhere. We just got to go find it. Haven't been finding any here, and it is not warm. No mosquitoes, but it's definitely much colder here. Anyways, I'll see you on the next one. Later.
So wet, stormy nights don't stay. From the moment that we met, you were worth the wait. Oh, this could be the best thing that I